Hello, and thank you for joining us for the 5th episode of the Digital Transformation of the Legal Industry webinar series. This episode will discuss Prosecution 2, Claim Tracking, Reference Analysis Tools and Reports, Prosecution Landscape Tools and Reports, and IDs Management. This is the 5th episode in an 8-part series. A recording of the webinar and the slides will be made available to all registrants. Feel free to enter any questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. They will be addressed in a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to see news about other upcoming webinars. And with that, I'll turn things over to our moderator.
Hey, thank you, Michelle. Steve Lundberg here. Welcome to our audience. I hope everyone is staying cool this week. If you're in an area that's a little hotter than normal here in Minneapolis, where I'm located, it's been close to 100 degrees for a few days. We usually like 1 or 2 of those days, but then more than that, us Minnesotans start to bake. So, but anyways, it's unusual weather here. And moving on to the presentation, we've got Pierce Blewett today. Pierce is a principal here at Schweigman. He's been here a number of years. Pierce, before that, was Vice President, Chief Patent Counsel at Kimberly-Clark, and was variously in charge of their international business, IP, and U.S. stuff. And so Pierce does a lot of analytical work, working with clients on, both prosecution portfolio building, but also strategic patent application development. Next up, we've got Ann McCracken, who's president of Black Hills IP. Ann is a patent attorney by original training and was a professor of patent law earlier in her career, and she's been president over at Black Hills for a number of years now. And Ann is a specialist in all manner of pretty much every aspect of patent law, but lately been focused on the processes and the automation that Black Hills does. And so Ann's going to talk today on topics related to that. Peter Ribafoni is our legal process manager here at the firm. Peter's been here a number of years too, highly experienced in IP back office process. We welcome Peter to the presentation today. And Jill Young, who's our software manager here at Schweigman. And Jill is a middleware IP automation expert par excellence. There probably isn't anybody that knows the trade better than Jill, so we welcome Jill today. So with that, we'll get the program rolling here. So today we're going to talk about claim history reports that we generate in our practice here, and those include reference information, reference history, citation history, and Piers and Peter are going to go through that. We're going to talk about our completely automated IDS features, functions that we have, and I guess Jill and Peter may be helping with that again too. We're going to talk about reference management. Ann McCracken's going to talk a little bit about the best practices for reference management, and I'm going to talk some about tools that we've developed to help analyze the content of references and prosecution sort of landscapes. So with that, we'll turn it over to the next speaker, which I believe is Pierce or Peter. Which one goes next here?
It's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Steve. So a number of years back, we realized we had the need to develop a tool to give to our attorneys to bring them up to speed quickly on prosecution histories. This is, in part because of budget constraints, but also just to aid them in absorbing or onboarding files where maybe they did not originally file the case, or where our attorneys are reassigned to a case that they didn't previously prosecute. So what we did is we created this tool, claim history reports, that we, every time we receive an action, we produce these reports and we roll them out to our attorneys in a systemic way, and we upload them into our case management database for them to use and aid in prosecution. And it's also been something that was so helpful for our attorneys that we started providing those on to our clients to provide them a little refresher on what the case was about. It's been particularly helpful to in-house folks who manage large portfolios. So the claim history report in its essence is a details tab, and we'll go through this and Piers will give us more a deeper dive. A high level chart showing the history of the rejections, a really useful claim history showing the development of those claims over time, the remarks that are being discussed with the examiner, as well as reference details of the applied art and links to the actual art themselves. So with that, I will, next slide please, and I will turn it over to Piers to dive deeper.
Thanks very much, Peter and Steve, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be. We know this tool, a lot of us, as the claim tracker. I'm a sailor, and I often think of this as kind of my pocket compass, if you will, through prosecution of a given patent application, or actually patent family, and indeed international as well. So if you cast your eye to the bottom of the slide, you'll see a number of tabs there. This is like a mini spreadsheet, if you will. So one of the cool things about this claim tracker, we use it a lot, and it's extremely helpful, is immediately on one page, on the sort of details view, you get all the bibliographic information, you know, your inventors, the patent number or application number, the assignee, all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of just a sanity check. You know, if there's an inventor you work with often, you can quickly see, oh yes, you know, Joe, this is one of Joe's cases, or Mary's, or whatever it may be. And it kind of steadies the ship for you in some ways. There'll probably be a lot of sailing analogies as I go through. So anyway, looking again at the bottom of the slide, you get the details. That's the view you're looking at now. You can click on claim chart, claim history, remarks. Think of the remarks as basically your arguments. The claim history, as we'll see, is the actual amendments that were made, and the argued references is the cited art, but we'll get to that. So just flat out straight away, there's kind of this convenient one-stop shop where you can get the information you need for the case you're dealing with. So next slide, please, Michelle. So the claim chart, before we get into the weeds of the claim elements, this is a really cool refresher of how the claims you're dealing with got there. So in this instance, you'll see in the left column the claim numbers. So that's claim 1, claim 2, claim 3. That's exactly as you'd see in a claim set. The next column along is telling you when they were introduced in prosecution. So 1 to 16, you'll see were original. And 17 to 23, you'll see have not yet made an appearance. But if you follow the claim 17 row to the right, you'll see it was introduced as a new claim in a non-final office action response on the 28th of April, 2016. So if you will, the first column and the second column are just telling you, look, how did these guys arrive, kind of thing? Where did they come from? The middle column, or the third one from the left, is telling you that there was a non-final office action issued, mailed on the 29th of Jan. That's in the top row. And it details for you very conveniently which rejection was raised against that particular claim. So for example, 1 and 7 got blown out on a 102 novelty reference, and we'll see which one that was later on. 8 to, where are we, 16, 103, that kind of thing. Now this view is for one office action only, but as your prosecution progresses, the view in the spreadsheet expands to the right. So you can keep going. You know, if there was a final and an RCE and then another non-final, you just keep scrolling across to the right, and you'll see similar kinds of information for those respective next office actions. So the final column on the right, the last column for this office action, if you will, you can see that, oh yes, we amended claims 1, 6, and 8, where you'll see it says currently amended and how many times it was amended. The rest of the claims were left alone. You amended claim 16, and claim 17 was new. So this page, this tab in your pocket compass is just giving you an overview of the world you're living in and where the claims came from, that kind of thing. So Michelle, next slide, please. So this, to me, we're starting to really get interesting here. This tab, the claim history tab, and the remarks or arguments tab often work together. Because as you know, in any office action response, there's kind of the amendment area, and then there's the argument area. So again, just to sort of situate yourself, in the left column, you've got the claims again that you see, 1, 2, 3, 4. The next column to the right, you'll see the actual wording from the claim in the app that was filed. So you can see where you started. And I'll come back to that, because if you like, that's your base claim, and sometimes that's useful to know where you came from. You've got the claim you're dealing with in the non-filers office action that was examined. Let's put it in the middle column, or the third column from the right. Now, what's really cool is the quick and easy way you can see what amendments were made. So the new elements are underlined, the additional elements in red, and the elements you deleted are struck through in blue, you know, in the manner one annotates these things in a response. Now, in the expanded text box, that's just so you can see the words a bit more clearly, but have a look at the bolded element, first data representative of a first scanned portion. And then, Michelle, if you go to the next slide, turn your eyes to the right, and you'll see in the cell on the right, that highlighted element right there, we're in a first data representative of a first scan portion as part of the amendments you made. And this shows you at a glance, not only what element you put in there during prosecution, but what you argued about it. And so this is telling you a lot of stuff straight away about, you know, potential estoppel and stuff, but let's unfold that a little. So you'll know I mentioned earlier about the key art, or in Europe, it might be called D1. And it's underlined there, to heart. You can search on that reference through these claim trackers to quickly identify what the art was that was cited, what the basis, the rejection was, and what you said about it. So you can search by the cited art, as the one text box shows. You can quickly search by a distinguishing claim element. You'll see, you know, as amended, claim 1, if you look there. The rejection type is the one that to me has proven the most useful. So for example, you want to see in a given patent family under the 102 rejections or heart, what did we say? So that 102. 103, you can check out your obviousness, you know, and what the issue is there. But to me, a really cool one is, for example, you get a situation where there's a new development in the law. Take 101 in the Alice case. And your client, or you, your patent department, if you're in-house, says, okay, what exposure do we have under 101? Alice. And over time, you'll know we all were filing different types of responses. Long type with all the law, short type with no law, trying to, get the examiner to bite easily. Technical solution to a technical problem, were those words going in. Now, bear in mind, as you progress to the right in prosecution, when the 101 rejection disappears, whatever you said in the column to the left of that disappearance worked. Now that's dynamite evidence. That's really helpful stuff. You said something in there that succeeded, and you can examine that. And you can collect a lot of these claim trackers and say, okay, let's go and look and see where the 101s disappeared and what we said, and then collate a whole body of insightful information and work out pretty quickly what's working, what's not working. Now, Alice, as you know, it was a little bit all over the show, but nevertheless, you can get a grip pretty quickly on, some insightful evidence you can share with your client or with your CEO or whoever it is that makes the decisions. So that's proven really helpful. And again, if you're prosecuting a family around the world, you can quickly see, okay, how did we get over heart in the US? Can we say the same thing in Korea or whatever it might be? Michelle, I think that's all I have on this one. Let's go to the...
Piers, I will add that one of the great things is that not only are these generated automatically, so the alternative in the past was to piece this information together manually, but when a change in the law like Alice happens, we're saving all this data and the different rejection types and database to produce these reports. You can also query the database to find that data. So if you want to find out, all the 101 Alice rejections you've received and how you've overcome them, we're able to crunch the data that way.
That's true. And Peter, you reminded me, because everyone, efficiency is a key goal for all of us, right? With budgets and time and everything else. You can actually copy and paste a ton of this stuff from directly out of here. And so if you want to use a similar argument again, boof, there it is for you. I wish I had this kind of stuff available to me earlier on in my career, but it's certainly proven so helpful.
I'll just throw an extra comment, Steve Lumberg, on that too, or put another exclamation mark on it. Realistically, most attorneys don't have enough time in their response budgets to go digging this information out from multiple different file histories spread, and used to be maybe you could take, 5 threefold files from the family and throw them on a desk and flip them all open and kind of hunt through the paperwork to find the comments and amendments. And then that went away. And then you had to do the same thing equivalent with trying to hunt through an online database or a document management system, which got even more difficult because, you just didn't have enough. You'd have to print the stuff out to spread it out, or you'd have to somehow or another have 20 displays and spread it out on your displays. So, the information has gotten harder to get at over the years because of digital transformation phase 1, we'll call it. And so being able to pull it all together in one place like this, I think, if I might just do a little sales for Schwegman at the moment, I think really helps our firm deliver a lot more value per hour expended in doing prosecution, because our attorneys aren't spending their time finding this data, digging it out. It's been pre-assembled. And a lot of that has to do with the work that Jill, Peter, others have done to create these processes where we digest this information as it comes in from the patent office and structure it in databases where it can be recalled and assembled into reports that make sense for the attorneys when they're consuming the information. So just a little plug there for this as a really highly advantageous way to get more value in prosecution. And I think especially when you've got complicated file histories and you've got multiple cases pending around the world, inconsistent statements about references in Europe versus China versus Japan versus US can really become a huge issue in litigation. So having this tool available to help people get it right or better has been very, very valuable for our clients.
Two quick things I'll add. Because you can kind of tailor these or use them in ways specific to your client's preferences. So in other words, one client I have is very keen on us reversing out old elements that didn't work before we put in new ones. So for example, take this case, first data representative of first scan portion, whatever that was. If it didn't work, so in other words, if another rejection appeared to the right, you know it didn't quite carry the day. So you can say, okay, well, I'll back that element out and you put another one in. Another client, for example, wants to see where did we start the first file claim, the one I was talking about moments ago, and where did we end up? And so if you scroll all the way to the right of your pocket compass, you can see all the changes over time, and they find that very, very helpful. So yeah, if you think about how you file a response, this has pretty much got everything you need. So it's actually far more than a pocket compass. It's kind of a chart plotter that tells you where in the world you want to go. Michelle, next slide. These are kind of your convenience features. Here are the references that have been cited with the type of rejection. So let me just slow down. You'll see the reference has a hyperlink. So you click on that and you get taken to the reference. So no more going to an old file or separate folder or something. And then in the column to the right, you'll see 103, 102, and there's our claims 1 to 7 got blown out by 102 and 8 to 16 one. So again, it's just so cool right there. And then Michelle, the next slide, it just throws a little more color on, okay, what are the references? Again, some bibliographic detail of some of the references, you know, just low-hanging fruit. You know, you can quickly check when this thing published, was it before or after our priority date, stuff like that. So net, a lot of useful stuff in a really cool little single place. I use these just about every day. A bunch of my clients really love them. We send them these to them. And when your GC walks in to you and says, hey, we need some patents to throw back at the competition, this is a really quick place you can come and have a look and see what you've got. So thanks for look. That's all from me. But Peter or Steve, any panelists, any final comments?
Not for me, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Michelle, next slide. And I think it's now Anne?
I'll introduce this. This is Peter. So now we're going to discuss automated IDS generation. So another need that we identified that we could resolve with an automated process is creation of IDSs. Oftentimes, you know, the art is coming in so quickly now and needs to be cited so quickly that we needed a way to get the art out of our database and into the PTO's hands as soon as possible. So one place in which we identified this as a problem to be solved is around allowances. Oftentimes, we have art sitting in our file that we may have just received that we haven't submitted an IDS. And of course, we all know that an allowance can be issued at any time by the examiner. Through looking at the data in PAIR, we realized that there was a small window available to us from when the case status changes from allowed until the actual notice of allowance is mailed out. You know, and typically it's a 2 to 3 day window. And this was a perfect example for us to be able to find, you know, through scraping that PAIR data, which cases have been allowed but not yet mailed a notice of allowance, and whether or not we have art waiting to be cited in our files that we could generate an IDS automatically. And take it beyond just alerting our attorneys that it exists, but actually preparing the IDS, getting it in their hands, and then getting it filed that same day to make sure that we beat the clock. So automated IDS generation is something that we have incorporated to great effect. And you know, the big net benefit is we've avoided RC fees for having to get this art in post allowance time and time again, because we're able to see that we have art that needs to be cited. So, to touch on, this example right here is an email that Jill's created that goes automatically. And maybe Jill, you can talk more about the elements that are involved and the components here.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. So yes, this is an example of an automated email that contains the IDS that was automatically prepared by our process. The content of the email is pretty standard. As we get to the bottom of the email, we get 2 links, and I'll tell you in the next slide how those are formed. But basically, those links contain the references first in their original format, and then in the flattened format, which is the ones that we would send to the PTO when we submit the IDS. And the beauty of this email is that it's ready to go. As long as nothing else needs to be changed, you've got your document to submit, and you've got all of your references downloaded in a convenient place where you're ready to go to the PTO and submit it. So with that, can we go to the next slide, please? So how this process works is when you log into Private Pair, there's where you can search for the application. There's also a section called Search by Customer Number. And within that search, you can do applications with status changes. And from there, you can search by a customer number or all the customer numbers associated with your login. And then you can choose the number of days you want to go back. So that is where we facilitate this process. And that scrape is actually done automatically on a daily basis. And what that gives us is any applications where the PTO status was changed the prior day, because we're scraping for the prior day, and the status has changed to allowed, but the notice of allowance has not yet been mailed. So that's what starts triggering this whole automation process. So we grab those, and from there we go into our matter management system, which is Foundation IP, and we look at the application and determine if there's any unmarked references that have not yet been submitted on that application. If that's the case, then that's when we would create this IDS. We would download all of the references, all of the non-patent literature and the foreign documents, put them in the folder, and then with a third-party tool, we're able to generate the flattened form of that PDF file. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how this actually occurs. And then from the prior slide, that's the email that then gets sent to the signing attorney on the matter. And then the IDS specialist is notified if that needs to be submitted. So that's the process. And that's kind of that was kind of the impetus for getting this going, because like Peter referenced, is that there's a short window of time where, in order to avoid doing the RCE and paying additional fees, we can curtail that with this process. We also use it in one other form for US matters that have been filed more than 2 months ago, but not more than 5 years ago. We don't go back that far. An IDS has not yet been filed in the case, and we have not received any office actions. And if there are unmarked references or non-patent literature, those are cases where we would also automate the generation of an IDS that would then get sent out to determine whether that needs to be filed at that point in time. So those are kind of our two big processes that we can do around this automated IDS.
And I should add that the reason that we do that on the second type is because we know no fees are due and no first action on the merits has been mailed. Obviously, we could automate all of our IDSs in a similar fashion, but then there's a question of fees and the status of the case, and it becomes a little more complicated. And we also don't want to detract from our urgent IDSs and the ones that we know we can file straight away.
Right. And there is also, when the IDS specialists are reviewing the cases that actually need to have an IDS filed, they basically, all they need to do is type in the application number in a tool that we have, and that submits it, and we have a process that watches for those constantly, and they submit it, and then within probably about a 10-minute window, they'll get emailed back the generated IDS, similar to the email that we saw in the previous slide. So basically for them, when they need to create an IDS, all they need is an application number, and we can do the rest.
Jill, might I just add, you know, to folks listening, you know, you think, oh, well, an IDS, you know, we're complying with our duty of disclosure, never terribly that, but I mean, of course, there are times when an IDS is supremely important. And you may be working with litigation counsel, you're looking to sort of nurse a particular app with particular claims through to allowance and grant, and, you know, go and force it against someone. You've mapped the claims, et cetera, and Steve's going to talk about that a little bit later. But that email, Michelle, I don't know if you can go back a slide where it says this one, private pay indicates if you're trying to get an app through, that this has saved my bacon more than once. You can get all the art you need to, submit it in an IDS, and of course with the presumption of validity, you know, so invoke the presumption. And so this really, really is a super helpful thing, especially when IDSs are important and you're trying to get as much art cited or included in the IDS as possible. So thanks. That was all I had.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, I think Anne is going to speak more to the specific tracking of how to accumulate your references.
That's correct.
And I will just add to this a little bit what Pierce said, in that there's a lot of waste in prosecution, patent prosecution, because of these IDSs that don't get cited or filed in time. And it's a challenging problem because there's so many cases in flight simultaneously that trying to get everything cross-cited on a timely basis without any automation really consumes a lot of resources. I don't even begin to know how anybody would do this if they're just tracking stuff by hand or in spreadsheets. To me, that would seem like a huge amount of labor that would be essentially wasted. I mean, whether you can justify the cost or not, it's still a waste of money. And even if you can charge your client for it, it's still wasting their money. So thanks to the people that put the stuff together. And Anne's going to talk about how this kind of has evolved from a very systematic way that we've been tracking references for decades now. But is it time for Anne to talk now, or are you done, Anne or Jill?
Yeah, we can move down to the next slide. One more. And yes, Anne can talk about that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. Well, and I have to say, I am shocked at how many law firms come to Black Hills that are having us do docketing for them. And in discussions with them, we find out that they are still manually tracking references through spreadsheets, or even sometimes more primitive forms of tracking than that. And the best advice from a digital transformation perspective that I can give this audience is that if you have tools in your docketing system already to track references, start using them, and start using them now. And many of the docketing systems that I'm sure this audience is using have tools built into them for managing and tracking references. Just to name a few: Foundation IP, AppCall, CPI. There's more than that, but there's just a few examples of ones that I know have reference modules that are either available out of the box or maybe as an add-on. So like Steve said, the traditional way to track references is with a spreadsheet. That is extremely error prone, and not to mention that's just time consuming, particularly if you have large related families. It's just nearly impossible to do that effectively. So like I said, if you have a docketing system that has some built-in functionality, start using that now. You shouldn't do this manually. If you don't have a system with that kind of functionality, Black Hills can help you with that too. We do reference management and tracking of references and prepping of IDSs for a lot of people. So my first tip is use your systems tools. Now, people who want to make that transition that I talked to from the manual way of doing it to using a tool that they have, often though feel like the obstacle is the fact that they have to initially populate that system with the stuff that they have previously cited. And just to give you a little bit of background on the way these tools typically work, usually on a matter by matter basis, you keep a list of the citations that have either previously been cited or that you're aware of that you need to consider to determine if they should be cited in that matter. So you have a list of references tied in with an individual matter. And then you can relate matters so that if there's a whole family, interrelated family, that these references need to be cross-cited in, the system automatically adds them to the list for the related family members and just saves you a ton of time. So when you first start using a system like this, though, you have all this historical information on things that have been cited that aren't in the system. And a lot of people see that as a roadblock. But quite honestly, again, going back to my first piece of advice, use the systems tools and start using them now. You don't necessarily have to even backfill. You could just say from, July 1st forward, all the references that we cite and all the IDSs that we prepare, we're going to track in our docketing system. Everything else will be historical. Over a period of a few years, most of those cases that didn't have the full citation list in the docketing system are going to issue, and the ones that you have filed from that point forward obviously will have the full citation history in the docketing system. So, the fastest way to get up and going is just start using it. Don't do any backfilling of that tool. But if you want to backfill, which is actually quite nice to have the full citation history in one place so that you can tell when a new reference comes in, has that one been cited or not, and it's all in one nice list in your system. You can backfill your system. And I've worked with several firms and actually corporations too, to work on backfilling the systems in the tools in their docketing systems. And the biggest mistake that I see people make when they do decide to backfill the references in a tool that they have is they make it much, much harder than it needs to be. I see people wanting to use all the capabilities of the system, which is good, but that includes in some of these systems being able to upload the PDF images of the reference that was actually cited. Now, think about what this tool is being used for at the point that you're backfilling. You're just building a list of the citations that have previously been submitted to the USPTO. You don't necessarily have to have every single PDF image uploaded in that system for the list to be complete, for you to be able to then start using it as a point of reference to determine what else you need to cite or what has and hasn't been cited. So you can make a project incredibly complicated and time consuming and delay the start of using this great tool if you approach it from the standpoint of thinking you have to completely fill it, including adding all the PDF images of these documents. You can just add the citation, meaning, the name of the patent, the patent number, the name of the reference if it's a NPL, and just put the bibliographic information in there and totally be able to use that system for the purpose of determining what references need to be cited and what haven't been cited. And so again, don't make things harder than they need to be. And if that's a overwhelming project, if you have a very large docket that you're managing and you need help, Black Hills can also help with backfilling of the citations into your system. Now, my last tip is then, once you've started using an electronic tool to track your references, you've either decided you're going to backfill or you don't backfill, but you've got it to the point that you're ready to start using it. My last tip is combine the tracking of references with your docketing workflow. So if you think about this, the majority of the documents that you cite on an IDS once an application has been filed are documents that are coming off something that has passed through your docketing department. That might be an office action that got docketed, a search report that, an international search report that got docketed, foreign office action, whatever it may be. There's something that's coming through your docketing department. And so for our customers, where we do automated docketing for our customers, we're able to tie in the tracking of the references with the docketing process so that our automation can identify a document that's of a type that might have references to be cited that need to be tracked. So if we process, like I said, an office action or a search report, our system not only dockets that, but it also flags it and says, oh, here's a type of reference or a type of document that may have citations that need to be tracked for IDS purposes as well. And then, in very advanced applications, it's possible to actually then OCR that document, extract the citations off of that document, and put them into a electronic reference management tool. If you don't have those capabilities, those are things Black Hills can help with, but there's also possibilities where we could design a workflow where we docket something for you and then identify things that need to be reviewed to see if references need to be added to a tool, and save those off and put them in a folder somewhere if you wanted to manually process them. So there's lots of ways we can design workflows, and that's one of the things I love doing. I have a lot of fun designing workflows. But the key thing here that I want you to take away on this third recommendation is to proactively be monitoring documents for citations that need to be tracked and putting those in a software tool when you first receive them. And that's typically when they're coming in through your firm's docketing process. Because if you're proactively doing that, you're actually going to prevent a lot of the situations that Jill's tool and Peter's tool take care of, where you get to the end of the process, you get a notice of allowance, and shoot, you have references that still need to be cited. Now, sometimes that can't be prevented. You got stuff coming in from foreign search reports and you just received it and it needs to be cited. But ask yourself, how often are you sitting there with references that you've had for a while, and then you get a notice of allowance? And either those references haven't even been entered electronically into any kind of system, they're just out there, or they have been entered into an electronic system, but nobody's generated the IDS yet. So if you have a process where you're getting those into an electronic system and you have that, you do that proactively, that can help you reduce the risk of being in the situation where you need a tool like Jill's to come in and generate an IDS right away and sneak it in before the notice of allowance comes in. So anyway, those are my tips. Use your systems tools. Don't make setting up that tool and backfilling it harder than it needs to be. And then proactively start tracking those references in that tool. And a great way to do it is by combining that process with, or triggering that process off of a docketing workflow. So next I'm going to hand this over to Steve, who's going to talk about some more sophisticated tools for managing the more substantive aspects of the references and what and how to cite them.
Thanks, Ann. That's some great tips in there. All right. So we're going to wrap up with a little overview of some additional tools that we use here at Schweigman to help, in certain cases, gain a deeper understanding of the prosecution landscape from a teaching perspective. We certainly heard in great detail how we track prosecution and art that's been cited. Another thing that we do that is used strategically in some cases, and in other cases we try to use it on a more widespread basis, is mapping out the teaching domain, if you will, of the prior art space. So your traditional prior art analysis is you pick a few references that you think are the closest references, and you look at those and you see what's taught in those references, and then you proffer a patentability opinion or make arguments in front of the patent office as to patentability over those references. Another way to approach that, it's not really a different way to do that part of it, but another way to gain insight into the likelihood of success of those arguments, or long-term likelihood that your patent will be valid even if you make the amendments that you see possible around a small number of references that have been cited, is to take the entire prior art space of interest and map the concepts in your specification, or at least in your claim, in the space that you're trying to claim, against all of that art, so that you can get a much more comprehensive view of what's going on with prior art. It's the big picture. So if go to the next slide. So there's different ways you can do this, but they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and certainly I'm going to show you some very simplified pictures in just a second. But the human mind is particularly well suited to see things in graphical chart form to gain faster understanding of its circumstances and its situation. And obviously, in patent prosecution, we deal a lot with abstract concepts, if you will, although never to claim one. But when we're trying to put claims together, but we definitely like to see things in a manner that's easy to conceptualize. The content of knowledge. So, there's a few different ways that we do these prosecution landscapes. The simplest way to do one is really to take a spreadsheet, and you can imagine, and we'll show you in a second here, every column of the spreadsheet could represent one reference, and each row of the spreadsheet can represent a different keyword or a concept. Keywords are easier because you just look for those in the specs of the patents, and you can look for synonyms and match them up. Concepts are more difficult because they don't match up quite as readily. Even with AI, it can be a struggle to figure out if a concept's contained in a patent. But if you do that, what you get is you get some really wonderful insights. Now, let's say you've got 50 references that are potentially applicable to a given technology, and it's been honed down to just a few of them that you think are most relevant. But isn't it nice to know, if you look at all 50 of these references, do any of them mention a certain idea that you've got in your spec? If none of them mention it in any shape, form, or manner, that's nice to know, because you might think, well, that's probably pretty unique, because none of these relevant patents even touch on that. Or if another idea that you're mixing and matching with your novel elements is found in a large number of patents, you might say, okay, that one is going to be readily combinable with a lot of other patents, because that idea is found in dozens and dozens of patents. So that one's going to be less influential for a combination to keep the combination afloat against an obviousness challenge. So these are the types of things we're looking at. Now, obviously, we don't have much time. We don't have much money in the typical case. Now, if we've got a lot of time and a lot of money, we can take a rich specification and we can map it both keyword and concept level against the body of art most relevant. And by doing that, we can identify all of the portions of the spec that contain very novel subject matter, and then think about different ways to combine those with other aspects of the spec that are not so novel, or even other aspects that are novel, to get all of the variants of claims that are possible. So I'll go on to the next slide. And we just kind of, this is very simplistic, but at the reference level, what we're doing is we're really looking at each individual patent, its spec, the patent spec, and deciding whether a concept is found in it or not. And of course, from a litigation perspective, you know, all this is worded in a sufficiently vague way so that, you know, there's no admissions in anything. But if we do a chart for, you know, 50 patents, and we've got maybe 20 concepts that are key to or that are found in our spec, and then we chart it against all these patents, is it in there or is it not in there? And then when that's all done, we see, okay, this reference has, you know, like all but one of these concepts. It's going to be a very relevant reference, right? Usually it's going to be your primary reference. Or it might be one that you hadn't even thought, that no one had cited, you find out has a lot of the concepts in it. But you get this big picture instead of just focusing in on 2 or 3 patents and then later finding out after you make all these amendments and arguments that the examiner just plucks a different one out that's got a little bit better coverage, and now you're back starting over again in your argument. Wouldn't it be nice to avoid that? So that's what this tries to do. And if you go to the next slide, this kind of gives you, you know, what it boils down to. So, you know, you've got a spec, you've got a bunch of concepts in the spec, and this could also be claims, combination of these concepts that are in your spec. And after you look at all the references in the space, you go, okay, well, concept 1 is found in 25 of the references. Say there's, you know, 50 references. It's found in half the references. Concept 2 is found in 0 of the references. 3 is found in almost every reference. 4 is found in 0. 5 is found in just a few. 6 is found in even more references than you have in this example. But anyways, what you get out of this is a sense for the ideas that are heavily trafficked, the sense for the ideas in your spec that are very unique. And then you can use that information to try to put together amendments that aren't going to just be, you know, knocked off by the next office action that comes in because you didn't bother to look any further than the 3 references that were cited. And when I say you didn't bother to look, oftentimes who has time to read, you know, all 50 references that maybe have been cited to the patent office that are in your file because they flow in from various different sources. And then the last level of this one, go to the next slide, is if you take this down to an individual reference, and again, you can do this, you've got all your, usually you do this with keywords, but you know, you've got the keywords that are most important to this particular patent. And obviously keywords have a lot of limitations. They're, you know, they're not concepts. They're, you know, easily, you need synonyms. So there's a lot of limitations in this, but it does give you insight. So you can take those keywords, you can map them against the individual paragraphs of references, and you can find the reference paragraphs that are the hot paragraphs, the ones that have the most number of hits, and zoom in on those more quickly than trying to scan through the reference using, you know, a lot of the tools will kind of highlight keywords, but, you know, it's kind of hard a lot of times to digest that. So these are tools that are available. We definitely use them when we've got something, you know, that we're working on where there's a high value patent and we want to make sure we've got early priority. We want to book it for everything it's worth. And I would actually flip it over to Pierce for a second, because I know he's used this tool to develop a very valuable portfolio for a client. Piers, you have a second to talk about that one without naming names or subject matter?
Sure, Steve, happy to, absolutely. This tool is particularly useful in a prosecution point of view, because you can use it for FTO or prior art analysis, but just trying to get a grip on a portfolio, so flat out mapping. And let's say there's an instance where you've filed, can we call it an omnibus provision or an omnibus patent application utility with a bunch of different embodiments and examples and stuff in there. Well, you can map all those out and see what you've got in the spec. And in the one instance, we were able to file close on 20 continuations, just eking out stuff that was identified or readily available by doing the kind of analysis Steve has mentioned. Now, obviously, not everyone might want 20 cons, but if you're a startup and you're trying to get somewhere and the tech that you're advancing is valuable and helpful and consumer preferred, this is precisely the kind of tool that can help you direct things along. So, yep, Steve, we've as you know, we've worked together. A good couple of instances where many times we've been able to help clients with this tool.
Yeah, and I think the tool we use actually helps organize. I mean, obviously somebody could do this manually, but we've got tools that we use that allow us to drop in keywords, have it map against specs, references, columns, paragraphs, and generate these reports. And so that's part of the advantage of the digital transformation we've done with analysis of stuff here at Schwegman. And with that, let me see if there's any questions. I guess there are no outstanding Q&A questions. Does anybody else want to add anything before we wrap it up? We're just about the top of the hour. All right, I guess without any further questions pending, we're going to turn it back over to Michelle. Thanks everybody for taking time out to attend the webinar today, and hope you learned something. Thank you. Oh, is there? Okay, great, thanks. That's it. Yeah, so go ahead, Michelle.
Hey, Steve. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and thank you to our speakers. The next episode of the Digital Transformation Series will take place on July 8th, when we discuss an SLW digital transformation case study in due diligence, freedom to operate studies, landscape studies, portfolio curation, portfolio analytics, landscape analytics, and examiner and attorney analytics. You can find the registration page on the SLW Institute on the SLW website, and please keep an eye out for the email invitation as well. Thank you again for joining us, and be well.